Hello and welcome to another episode of Bare Bones Wargaming, a show with no bells, no whistles, no frills, just a man, a camera, and his game. Okay, I decided to come back and give some final thoughts. And I do think these might be the final thoughts. I might do one more video in this series, potentially looking at all three maps put together. But be a little curious to see exactly what that's going to look like. I think I mentioned before that there's definitely some overlap with the maps. Or like say, Army Group South, and there's Kiev down here at the bottom, and really the Army Group South map starts somewhere around here. So that's a pretty big chunk of this map. Roughly, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. It's like 10 rows there, and then you can see here at the top where I have the yellow dice. That's the borders of the operational area for Army Group Center. If you're only playing Army Group Center, which is what I'm doing now, and again, you can see how much space there is above them, even just up to Riga, and of course the other map has Leningrad and stuff on it. So a couple of things, I guess. I mean, just kind of an impromptu review. So, yeah, let's just do that. We'll just... Wah, wah, wah. Wah, wah, wah. So, by the way, that womp womp thing actually is a person doing it. There's a video on YouTube, the Danish Symphony Orchestra, doing the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly theme song, among some other songs from that movie too. And there is a person. They show the person doing it. So I was wondering about that, whether that was a voice or instruments. That's what it is. So let's see. Let's start with. I guess we'll start with the good. The good here is, after having played Army Group Center, Army Group South, I admit I've not done Army Group North yet, but I do feel confident in talking about this quite a bit now, and what my general thoughts overall are. One of the good things is the exploitation. I love the exploitation. It really does let you lunge your panzers forward. I'm just starting the second turn here, and I'm just getting ready to unleash my panzers, which I have here with these force markers. You can see the ones that are right side up and upside down, like you can see number 2 and 3. And again, like I said in the previous video, I've been using the strength point markers from Stonewall's Last Battle, just to make things easy and not have such a problem. But if you look at where my leading elements are there, up there at Force 2, and if you come back a little bit, you can see over here is, my finger showing up? There's my finger. There is Smolensk. So, and I'm just getting ready to start turn 2, which every turn is basically half a month, except for the first turn. The first turn is the last part of June there, last week really in June. 8 days, I guess, if you want to get technical about it. But anyway, I do like how you can lunge forward, especially with the penetration assaults. If you've got a front line set up, you break through, you really can make it far. Now, that being said, another thing I do like is the logistics part of this. The Germans, I've gotten them pretty far, but it hasn't been without cost. I've got quite a few units that are already worn down by attrition. And that's another thing in this game, is you got to think of strength points as basically combat effective. There's a rule in Army Group Center and the other games too, that when the Russians lose their units on the first 2 turns, you roll a die to see if they come back as reinforcements automatically in X amount of turns down the road, or whether you actually have to use your replacement points to build them. And again, it's disintegration, it's things like that. I haven't been able to form too many really good pockets yet around the Russians when it's been the Russians' turn. But again, another thing I like about the game is that since you're activating by stacks, then you also get that feel of the frenetic trying to punch out of the pocket kind of thing. or some Russian units may be sacrificing themselves so that they can weaken the German forces and eventually break through the lines. I thought that Eastern Front Solitaire did a nice job of illustrating it, but I thought that the casualties inflicted were a bit too excessive, because you really couldn't keep your mechanized forces on the board. That's just my personal opinion, but yeah, that's how I see that. So the logistics here are represented quite well, and I have to admit, I've been debating in my head about the logistics a little bit. So the logistics is both kind of a good and a bad, because on the one hand, the German forces do get worn down. If you're going to go racing ahead, you've got the attrition die rolls you got to do, and it does wear your forces out. You can race ahead of your logistics. That being said, the supply rules about 3 hexes to a functioning, read here, converted railhead, that just seemed a little, it just seemed a little odd given how much the Germans did use the roads, like the truck convoys, for lack of a better way to put it, to bring up supplies and stuff. And even how many rail hexes you can convert each turn, I was kind of like, well, did that seem kind of good, bad? And then I went back, because the first game I ever ran into that really talked about any kind of logistic things here, and I'm going to come back out on you here, years ago. Actually, I think this was my first real game on the Eastern Front. I bought this way back in the early 90s, 1992. At a little store called Patty's Paperbacks, which used to be in Indiana, Pennsylvania, near the IUP campus, and they had lots of books, lots of comics too, and in the back they had a handful of games, and this was one of the games. And this one was the first one I ever ran across with logistics. I mean, you had to convert. You had to use one of your combat units to convert up to 3 hexes a turn. And when I think about it, I compared it, and I decided to dig it out for that reason. But when I compare the time scale here, it's 1 month per turn for those guaranteed 3 hexes. So, looking at it that way, it's not quite so odd, I guess is the word I want. But nonetheless, I have been tinkering and messing around with the rule, an idea of if you can trace to a road that can trace to a rail, then there's a modifier, a die roll modifier, when you roll on the attrition chart. So basically, still reflecting the intermittent possibility of getting supplies, but also the intermittent fact, because it's a die roll modifier as opposed to, oh, well, I can trace, so bam, automatically, I'm good to go. Okay. Other good things I do like the fact that there's the different attack options that you have. I have wondered a little bit about maybe if there would be a way to do a grand assault with a non-ZOI force. Yeah, it's just kind of I don't know. It's something, I guess, something to think about. Something maybe for Ray at CSL to take a look at and stuff. But I do like the attack bit. I do like the fact that you can move, and it's part of movement unless you do like a grand assault or you do the penetration, which makes sense because you got to prepare all that stuff, and there's definitely benefits to that in terms of lost points. But I do like that idea. I do like how that works with that. So other good things, it does. Well, this again, there's a lot of things in this that kind of straddle the line between good and bad, because on the one hand, it does play pretty quick once you start to get the hang of it. Once you start to lunge your forces along and stuff, and then as when you're on the defensive, if you're trying to react with forces, you can do that, but that also spends them, so you have to be careful because they won't be available when it's actually your turn. But at the same time, it does feel at times a little cumbersome. As you can even see here from Army Group Center, which has a lot fewer counters in terms of combat counters than Army Group South, or maybe actually it might just be the space that's more is not as the space ratio, I guess, between counters and space. It's not quite as cluttered, although I know it probably looks like it right now with that lump in the middle there. but I've had fewer troubles. But then again, part of that is because, and goes with kind of the bad, is that this game really needs force markers, especially the Germans who can stack 4 units in a hex. That starts to get cumbersome to move around and stuff. That's why I went to the strength point counters, as I mentioned before. So, some other bad things, I guess, is there's a lot of assumptions made in this game. Some really basic stuff like terrain effects chart doesn't exist. The turn record track is not labeled. Those kind of things really, especially for a new gamer to the field or even a new gamer to the topic, those things I think really need to be outlined. And some things need to be specific too. Like for example, you can see over here in my shot, I've got these 2 light blue dice here delineating the 8 hexes that make up the border, and that's not listed in the book. You kind of have to figure it out. The fact that we're talking about north of the marshes, those 8 hexes, and you kind of count from there. That kind of stuff really needs to be spelled out, in my opinion. I also think that the game would benefit from having a player aid that has the combat procedure on it, and also all the modifiers listed as well too. I think it would make things smoother. I've spent a lot of time flipping back and forth in the rule books. As a matter of fact, what I've done is I've kind of taken one book and had it to flip through for the rules, and then the other book, one of the other ones, this one from Army Group South, I just permanently leave on the back page where the CRT is, because it's just to flip back and forth all the time. It's just it's a bit of a pain with that. Trying to think here exactly what else I want to say before I'm done. As far as the ugly goes, as far as the ugly goes, the only thing that's really, I guess you could say that maybe some of this falls into the ugly category, has been some of the simple oversights, for lack of a better way to put it. Again, the Army Group South map not having the borders of Hungary and Romania labeled. The turn record track not having the months on it, because it makes a big difference. If you're saying like end of August, as it says in the Army Group Center, end of August or turn 4, there's certain adjustments you do to simulate the resources that were drawn off to the north and the south from Army Group Center. Well, if you don't know when the end of August is because it's not labeled, that's a bit of a problem. So, if you're saying if you get this far or, turn 4, well, what exactly is turn, or where is August at? That's what it was. It was like either, you get X amount of distance or end of August. Well, it's not labeled on there what that is. So, I guess, yeah, I'd have to say that the ugliest part of all this is really just some of the simple oversights that there have been. Now, with that being said, I will say that Ray Weiss, the guy who is the driving force, if you will, of CSL, he's been very responsive to all the critique that I've pointed out, the issues that there's been. He's been very quick to respond on Board Game Geek, which I prefer Board Game Geek because Consim World is just, there's a lot of good stuff there, but it's hard to navigate. It's just hard to navigate. That's my personal opinion. So, all those things he's been very responsive to. I've submitted to him, some of these things that I've caught on with some of the errata and stuff, to kind of help, smooth things out and make things better for, folks purchasing in the future. So I would say that's probably the big thing with that so far. The system is definitely interesting. The system is it is an interesting approach to the Eastern Front. I like it overall. I do wish that maybe there was a little more room with the map. I mean, of course, you don't want to make it gigantic because that's the whole point of the Destroy All Monsters operational series. But at the same time, it does get a little crowded, as you can see there. I mean, I've got all my foot sloggers, which you have to move your non-ZOI guys first. before you move your ZOI equipped forces. So I've got all my foot sloggers, here between Vilnius and Minsk, basically, because I was able to bring up an infantry force close enough to capture Minsk by turn 2, which is a good sign. I mean, I don't remember who said that once on Wargaming Geek, but they made the statement about, in a Russian Eastern Front campaign, if you can't capture Minsk, by the end of the first turn, second turn, that kind of thing, then there's something wrong. There's something up with that. That's just, because it's what historically happened. So, but then again, I guess that gets into the debate of, do you let the Russian player set things up competently, so to speak, or not? Or do you kind of do more of a historical setup to recreate, what was going on and stuff. And I think that's part of the challenge of any design on a game on the Eastern Front is, really how do you build into the design what, to me anyway, from the reading I've done over the years, was really the Germans' edge. Because, you think about it, everybody talks about them running into the KV tanks and the T-34, and yet they still were able to roll on. Even though their anti-tank guns were undergunned with those and stuff. And yeah, okay, they brought up in the 88s and all that stuff, I get that. But really, when you read carefully, and especially it comes through very clearly in Robert, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name, Focek's books, which, let me see if I have one of those at hand. Yeah, here we go. Because I read the first volume, but I haven't got around to the second volume. Because again, as you guys all know, my chief interest in the Eastern Front is 4142. But in his book, Tank Warfare on the Eastern Front, he does a good job of basically illustrating, the Germans' huge advantage. What the Germans' huge advantage really was combined arms. That comes through loud and clear also in Luther's book about Barbarossa, which focused on the Army Group Center. So in that sense, having these ZOI versus non-ZOI units and then being able to do the exploitation, which again, if you launch a prepared assault, using all your movement points, so when you do exploitation with an armored unit like Panzer Division, you get all those movement points, which is typically 7, plus the standard exploitation value, which for armor is 2, plus if you really crush the opposing force and say inflict 2 or 3 loss points above what they can handle, then you're also getting that added on to your movement factors. But again, being able to race ahead like that is awesome, but then you also have to look at the attrition factor too. You're gonna, if you keep all your forces together, you keep them on one stack, it's gonna be a problem. Supplies and logistics and stuff. So there's a lot of good stuff here. There's certainly a lot of interesting stuff, and it's been enough to keep me continuously playing this basically for the last week. Eventually I'm going to shift to Army Group North, and I'll probably come back and look at everything again when I put all 3 sheets together. And although that's going to be, quite an interesting undertaking, I'll be very curious to see how it all sets up when all those get put together. So I guess you could think of this as like a halfway point review. That's why I've kind of mentioned the good, the bad, and the ugly, but also not entirely set in stone, if you will. But I feel pretty good saying that this is definitely an interesting system. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. There's no doubt about that. But it is a system that, again, the hardest thing, the biggest thing, I guess, for me, that's a very appealing part of this, is the whole exploitation movement, and the fact that when you move with your exploitation movement, you can then also launch standard attacks until you basically run out of movement points. You can keep going and going and going and going. And, kind of piggyback rolling that, which again, you're going to run out of steam eventually, because, again, if you're an armored formation and you launch a standard attack and you defeat the Russians, then let's say that you don't inflict more loss points than they can handle, then you're going to end up with 2, the standard exploitation movement points, plus 1, which is the attack plan, the standard attack. So that's only 3 movement points. And again, you have to move into a hex, so it has that in similarity with Russian front. You have to actually move into a hex and then launch the attack, which again, you can move into a hex, and even with 0 movement points, you can launch a meeting engagement, which can be risky business for the attacker. It very much is a double-edged sword in that sense. So, so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now with this. I'm kind of, let's see, what's another way to articulate what I'm thinking and how I feel about this? If I was going to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, I'd rather staple my tongue to the wall for a year, versus 10 being like, this is totally awesome. I would probably put this somewhere right now at probably right around a 7. I mean, there are some other games, and I will say a big caveat on this is I have, and it's sitting here looking at me, by the way, I have not done Thunder in the East yet. I have it on my shelf. I haven't got around to trying it yet. But I've done a lot of other Eastern Front games, both, big, whole games, and smaller operational games, like von Manstein's Backhand Blow versus, Russian Front. And this one is definitely a system that is very intriguing to me and interesting. I think it does warrant some more exploration, some more plays, just to see what the potential here is. Because again, you could make the argument that given everything that happened in that first 6 months of the invasion with Operation Barbarossa, it is amazing that the Russians managed to survive and that they managed to hang in there. But then perhaps one of the biggest questions is, should the Germans have paused at some point? Should they have waited? I mean, that would have let the Russians build up their strength, but then again, the Germans would have still had their edge in combined arms like they had in 42 with Case Blue. So, there is kind of that trade-off as well. But the other thing is, and this is a little harder to simulate, and granted this would be ahistorical, is that really, the most success countries have had over the ages dealing with Russia and being successful invading Russia is when Russia has had internal problems. You look at the Poles with the time of troubles. They got all the way to Moscow during that early part of the 1600 to 1613, as I recall. And then even look at World War I. With the Russian Revolution and the Soviets and stuff. Just look what the German army managed to get their hands on. I mean, if Germany managed to win in the West, I mean, whew, Germany would have been gigantic at that point, given all the territory that they were able to seize from Russia with that. But again, they took advantage of the internal problems. And again, it's really difficult to do that with a game like this because, of course, with the Nazi, philosophy and ethos and stuff, it's not realistic, even though, lots of people in the Baltic states and even in Ukraine first welcomed them as liberators, then, when the other shoe fell, well, that's when everything got ugly and, messy and, it was just absolutely horrific. I mean, this whole thing, the whole Eastern Front was horrific. There's no other way to put it. It's just, it's like some primordial, I've always thought of it as like 2 T-Rexes going at it and just ripping each other apart. In the end, so. But I mean, there's no good way to kind of do that without taking away that aspect of it, and I don't think you really can do that objectively speaking, unless I guess if you really want to go, way off, and like in Totler Krieg, it is possible, and of course I had this happen once. It is possible to have a democratic Germany, militaristic mind you, but a democratic Germany emerge after the First World War. And that's what I had with one of my playthroughs, was actually Britain and Germany allied to each other because they were the democracies, and France actually was communist and allied to the Soviet Union. So unless you really want to go completely off the rails, which a lot of people don't want to do, then yeah, it's kind of hard to kind of look at that aspect of it, because I don't think it's realistic to think that the Nazis could have fomented that kind of political internal upheaval at least not taking advantage of it, because clearly there was a lot of dissent and issues in the Soviet Union, but because of their philosophy, because of their absolutely horrific way of looking at the rest of the world, there was just no way to exploit that. So I don't think that's something realistic to do. Didn't mean to kind of get off on a rant there a little bit on, but it's part of the great what if with Barbarossa. Was it possible with different circumstances or different tweaks or different changes to things and stuff? And I mean, that's part of why we play these games. I mean, I think a lot of people do, and I know I do, to try and see, was it really feasible? Could it have been done? Maybe. But then again, I guess you could make the same argument about, if the Japanese, do me and excuse me to let's say sink both American carriers at the Coral Sea, or actually be luckier at Midway. Because I mean, let's face it, the U.S. we of course, I'm an American, we were extremely lucky at Midway. If the shoe had been on the other foot, what would have happened? Is it possible? Maybe. Possible. I've read a couple different books, including The Admirals, which is I forget who wrote it, but it was very much a more mainstreamed history book, talking about the war weariness of the U.S. public by 1944. So, that's another thing. Just all those casualties and all that, just wearing things down. That can get to you, and it can. I mean, obviously it did 20 years later with Vietnam. So, anyhow, like I said, if I was going to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10 right now, I'd give it a 7. It definitely has potential. I definitely find it interesting. I guess then the question becomes, and I guess I'll save this for the next video, once I get a chance to do Army Group North and then try to put these three together. The question is, will it have staying power? Will it be like a game like von Manstein's Backhand Blow or Russia Besieged, that I'll want to go back to and revisit again, or like the Barbarossa campaign, which is a fantastic strategic treatment of it, or like any one of the the Moscow 41 or Leningrad 41 or Kiev, which comes out soon. Will I want to go back and revisit it and play it again, or like No Retreat, the Russian Front? That's another good example of a game that I like to go back to and play from time to time. So anyway, so that's kind of just like wrapping up my thoughts at this point after, I think this is my 4th or 5th play at this point with all this. So there you have it. I know that, some folks have been, on the fence about this, been debating whether to pick one or more up. I would say, on that note, I would say that if you're going to try this, do not, let me say that again, do not start with Army Group South, because starting with Army Group South was, in retrospect, a bad idea, but I was interested in that area of operations. That's why I started there. But it was a bad idea in the sense that Center is playing much more fluidly and much easier than South did. And I think part of it is because of the number of units, especially on the Russian side. Because, of course, in Army Group South, there's a ton of Russian units because that's where Stalin thought the main German effort was going to be, going after all the resources, in the Ukraine and the Donbass and all that stuff. So at this point, my evaluation for this, I guess you could say, is kind of sideways. It definitely, I'm hitching a ride. I'm thumbing it. I'm hitching a ride because I think it is worth still exploring and still worth the ride. I just don't know if it's going to have the staying power of some other games in my collection. That's kind of where I'm at right now. So yeah. Okay. So, with that thought in mind, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to ride this tiger, so to speak, since, I'm one of those people that when I get the bit between my teeth, I like to ride it as far as I can until, I'm exhausted, so to speak. Because I just got my copy of Ancient Civilizations of the Inner Sea earlier today, and I'm kind of curious. Oh, excuse me, it's getting kind of late. I'm kind of curious about that because, my wife and I enjoy playing History of the World. So I'm hoping that's something we'll be able to play together. because it seems to have a similar feel. I could be wrong, but it seems to have a similar feel to that. And so I'm kind of intrigued. I'm going to be checking that out sometime in the near future. So there you have it. There's my thoughts and ideas about this whole game system and stuff up until these two at this point. Oh, the one other thing I almost forgot to mention was the zones of control. The zones of control are a little interesting in this game. You do have to be careful. They are tricky. Zones of control are negated by friendly units for line of supply. They're not negated by friendly units for retreat. And here's the big one. The zones of control do not affect movement. So you can, with a Panzer division, go right past, a Soviet formation and, again, try to pocket them because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all as far as that goes. Now, if you don't make a wide enough breach, then, yeah, they're going to be cutting you off from supply, and then that becomes an issue with the surrender segment in this, which is done on each player's turn. So, like, for example, the German player's turn, if you're adjacent to a fully supplied enemy unit and you're not supplied, then you surrender, and then you're removed from the game completely. So that's something you have to be very careful about there, too. So I don't know if that leads to gamey stuff, because I haven't really explored that fully yet, but I'm just putting that out there. That's kind of an odd sort of thing, because we usually think of zones of control, affecting units as they move past the 6 hexes that surround the unit in question. So something else to think about with this system. My advice as far as that goes is the rule books are online, so definitely read the rule books before you purchase one of the games. So, yeah. All right. So, on that note, I'm going to finish up here this episode. And I'll be back again at some point. I'm not sure when exactly. Like Schwarzenegger, I'll be back at some point in time. It's just a question of when and with what. So anyway, there's some more information for you about the Deimos Barbarossa trilogy. So, this is Tim Korchner from Bare Bones Wargaming, saying thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time from some field of battle. I guess that's the best way to put it. Thanks for watching.